Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Bill. Welcome. Milestone for us. It's our 30th anniversary, and you've been a supporter over many years. So I'm really delighted that you wanted to contribute to our society again. So off you go.
Good deal. I'm gonna try to set up my screen share here. Okay, and just trying to get the busyness off my screen. But in any case, I'm Bill Simpich. I'm coming in here from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I wanted to do a shout out to Paul Abbott, who's presenting tomorrow morning. I've read his book. It's the first one on the Oswald assassination. And I'm offering that if you really want to try to dope out who did what to whom that weekend, among those three assassinations, I think the Oswald assassination is the best one to look at because I think it was the most ad hoc. And what I think is revealed when you do that is you see that the Dallas police played a key role, obviously, in setting up the death of Oswald. And I think the Dallas police are of great import here, as well as the Secret Service. And the reason I say that, I think, will come clear in my presentation. But for now, let me dive in with Kent Biffle and the Fort Worth Press, which will kind of unfold the story a little bit. And Kent was a reporter with both the Fort Worth Press and then later with the uh, Fort Worth Star Telegram and the Dallas papers. And here's a little bit of his story. Uh, you can see this screen about Fort Worth man asks for red citizenship. This is in November of 1959, right at the beginning. And there's other headlines like 20-year-old Marine to renounce citizenship with little quotes by Oswald. And if you turn to the Fort Worth paper, there's a photo of a gentleman who looks like Oswald with a woman and a little girl all looking at the newspaper. The gentleman looks like Lee Oswald, but in fact, it's the best Lee Oswald double you could ever ask for. And it's Robert Oswald, and that's his wife, Veda, and their daughter with the headline, Brothers Turn to Reds, Puzzled Fort Worth Man. These are examples of the press coverage that was being obtained. And the fellow who wrote two articles in particular during this time in November is a man named Kent Biffle. He was an informant with the FBI a couple of years later in 61 on the mafia side of things. And he's answering to Robert Barrett of the FBI, who also was in all three locations that day, meaning Daley Plaza, the Tippit shooting, and then the Texas Theater. I always look for people who are at those three events because I think that says something. And Biffle wrote articles to the Fort Worth Press again, Fort Worth Star Telegram. Then we'll see him with the Daily Morning News. Here's Kent, and now he wrote an article in the 1st of November saying Fort Worther may become Russian so he can write about experience. Then, about the 16th of that month, down at the bottom here, he actually tried to place a three-way call to Lee Oswald in Moscow while Marguerite, Lee's mother, was hiding under the rescue. And so the FBI taped it, wiretapped it.
Abuse and many other issues. The judges have tried to seize the executive branch.
I'm sorry. Okay. So the headline is Moscow phone went dead. Turncoat hangs up on mother. And that word turncoat is highly charged. I saw it again and again in the stories in the papers, and the term itself was popularized around the Oswald case by Kent And Lee Oswald clipped Kent's story, and it can be found in his possessions. he wrote about it. And when he wrote John Connolly asking for his discharge to be upgraded, which I think is a key aspect of this whole case, but I'll hold off on that till another time. So, fascinating information about this case during November is that I found one clip in the Star Telegram saying the remainder of this dispatch was being held in censorship. It's kind of an overflow from the censorship of World War II, but it's still jarring to see a story about Oswald or anybody in 1959 being withheld because of censorship. Kind of mind-boggling. So I'm going to step up the story now, because Kent did write a story when in '62 when Oswald came back. Marguerite tracked Kent and used the Fort Worth Star Telegram as a dropping-off place for her mail and her phone calls in the 1960 period. It's quite amazing when you think about it. Peter Dale Scott, who educated me on this. And it's not to say that Marguerite is some kind of spy. In fact, I went to Marguerite's archives in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Texas Christian. And it just reaffirmed what I think. I have a lot of faith in her, actually, as a witness. I think she got a real bad rap as a woman, and as an older woman, and as a working class woman, even from the research community, but especially, of course, from the press, who seized every opportunity to denigrate her. And I think the reason why, of course, was because she was saying back in the late 50s, early 60s, she believed her son was an agent for the CIA or something like it. Biffle was working with her and paying her money to give him stories after Lee's defection. And that's why she was so eager to work with him, because she was so poor. She was as poor as she could be. And she worked with a lot of prominent people taking care of their kids. She took care of the mayor of Arlington's kids. She took care of the Fort Worth Star Telegram publishers' kids, the Carters, Amon Carter Jr. And the father, Amon Carter, was considered the father of Fort Worth. He was a major funder for the military industrial side of things and aerospace and you name it. And his son ran the newspaper. And he had a camp. And Lee Oswald went to his camp. It was called the Carter Camp. And Marguerite worked at Amon Carter's house till 11 days before the defection in November. And I bring all this up just to show how prominent the defection of Lee Oswald was to Fort Worth and Dallas alike. And now I want to close this portion with Mr. Biffle by the last days before November 22nd. And in particular, I want to focus on a quote from Tom Dillard, who worked for the Dallas Press. He was a photographer. This is crucial. Here's the quote. So, at Love Field, everything went fine up to the point that the whole day became a great frustration for a photographic person. First thing, parades were usually handled with a flatbed truck for pool and certain selected photographic personnel to ride in front of the presidential car in presidential parades. Again, to ride in front of the presidential car in presidential parades. That was canceled at the last minute. We were put in Chevrolet convertibles to ride several cars back. I think we were about 6 cars back. Bob Jackson and I and a couple other boys were in this parade. That put us totally out of the picture. And I've got these photos courtesy of Vince Palomara from Mexico City and Nashville and a variety of other locales, all showing the president behind the photo cars. The photo cars in front, and the photo is being shot of the presidential car that follows. And you can see JFK waving to the crowd in these other towns. But we don't have that photo in Dallas. Why not? It's because the Secret Service fellow changed the order of the motorcade and put the press people in the back. And I say specifically so there wouldn't be good photos of the president being shot up. See, again and again and again, you see great photos of the president here. Can you imagine if we had photos as well as the Zapruder film? we wouldn't be debating a lot of these issues today. It would be much more clear. So here's the clip for November 15th, 1963. JFK, tight schedule. JFK motorcade seems unlikely. It goes on to say, despite numerous requests, the Chamber of Commerce says prospects for motorcade there aren't too bright. A tight schedule and security regulations stand in the way. Now, here's another clip. This time it's from Kent Biffle. 2 days later, on the 17th, it says, incident-free day, urged for JFK visit. And Kent's lead paragraph is, Dallas leaders urged Saturday against any demonstrations or incidents during President Kennedy's visit here Friday. And sure enough, on November 19th, 2 days later, it was confirmed that not only would there be a motorcade, but they print right in black and white what the directions of the motorcade are going to be. The motorcade will then pass through downtown on Harwood and then west on Main, turning back on to Elm at Houston, and then out the Stemmons Freeway. Now, keep in mind, I'm fine about them putting the motorcade route here, but this is not really the motorcade route anymore. This is making public what the killing zone is going to be, because I think most of you know there weren't hardly any spectators there. I mean, the president was just about to exit onto the Stemmons Freeway going, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. And there's only a handful of people in Dealey Plaza, because that was not, in any real sense of the word, a gathering a ground for people to see the president. Unless, of course, they were planning to kill him. Here's another article the next day in the Dallas Morning News. This is the 20th of November. Breakfast entry due by way of kitchen. President Kennedy is insured of a cook's tour prior to making his appearance Friday in a Hotel Texas breakfast in his honor. This was the 22nd morning of in Fort Worth. The Secret Service, which guards the president, has laid out the most direct route for the Kennedys to take from the elevator to the grand ballroom. It's through the kitchen. Can you imagine telling the public what the entryway is going to be through the kitchen? It's absolutely outrageous. And of course, that's how Bobby got killed 5 years later. And don't you think that this is very possibly a fallback plan in case things weren't looking so good in Dallas? Maybe the job could have been done right there. Now, let's move on. Again, there's James Ewell, who is the successor to Jerry Hill, who used to do the do the police column for the newspaper, and then went on to be the second in command behind Westbrook, who was the man for internal police affairs and had all the dirt on all the Dallas cops. And Ewell succeeded Jerry Hill, who I think was part of the problem along with Westbrook. Here's Ewell, who was a police reporter, and he knew all the skinny about what was going on with the police and the press. Ewell reports that more than 400 officers, including 40 state patrolmen, will be deployed for Friday's presidential visit, which police officials described Wednesday as, quote, the most elaborate security arrangements ever made here. And they get into all the details. 40 state officers, 13 Dallas County sheriff's officers, police detail of 250, just spilling all the beans. Unbelievable. This is news, as far as I'm concerned, for the bad guys. And sure enough, we now have access to the Secret Service lineup for the motorcade. And this was put together by Todd Vaughn many years ago. Really wonderful work, and it's verified by a number of sources. And we know that the presidential limousine was number 4, and we know that the National Press camera car that was now, instead of being between the lead car and the limo, it's now about 9 back to number 9, and then the main camera car from the front to the back, so JFK could not be photographed. Now, Vince Palomara blames Floyd Boring in Washington for the Secret Service for this move, saying that Winston Lawson on the ground merely executed Boring's plan, which was spelled out 3 days before the assassination. And now, 4 days, 4 cars beyond the camera car, there's a local press pool car. And here we are. This is the camera car, and this is the local press pool car, which is none other than Kent Biffle and other individuals in the local press who literally crashed the motorcade. As one of them said, they unofficially joined the motorcade at Love Field rather than being a planned vehicle. And this allowed Biffle, by accident or design, to be right in front of the Texas School Book Depository within moments after the assassination. And what Biffle claims he did was he ran to the grassy knoll because he thought shots might have come from there because people were running that way, and then he ran right back to the front door of the book depository, and then he ran inside the door, and a man who ran inside the door about the same time as he was a photographer with a movie camera named Tom Allier, pretty well known in the research community. And Allier claims, and this is important, I ran upstairs with the Secret Service men. It boiled down to the 4th, 6th floor. Allier is a master in confusion, but he sometimes gives away little bits. We never knew the Secret Service was in there until Allier told us. And he says, I filmed 400 feet of film of the Secret Service men looking for the assassin, climbing over boxes, looking over rafters, and that actual finding of the gun. So I've got to sit down now and look at Allier's footage and try to figure out who those Secret Service men were. And maybe some of you can help me with that. And so, if you can believe it, the only 2 men who got inside the book depository beyond the 1st floor who were actually reporters were Tom Allier and Kent Biffle. And Kent and Tom were there for the finding of the shells and the finding of the Mannlicher Carcano. And Allier filmed this. And you can actually see the Mannlicher in his film. And that's a discussion for another day. But there's lots of what I consider planned confusion in this case. And I think one of them is the business about the Mannlicher and Mauser. And another one is people like Allier, who can't remember if they're on the 4th floor or the 6th floor. People like Frank Ellsworth from the ATF back then, who I think was also part of the problem in red herrings. So now, this is yet another piece of it. Allier throws his film out the window, and then most of his film is mysteriously destroyed. We just have tiny pieces of it left. And most interestingly, both Biffle's story and Allier's story were buried for many, many years and not brought forward. Allier didn't come forward and claim credit like any reporter usually would, even though his footage was on TV that day. Kent Biffle wrote an article, in fact, 2 articles on the 23rd of November with his name in the Daily News. Here's Allier supposedly getting searched at the scene. Who knows where and when? He ran in the door and he got inside. That's the important thing. And then they let him stay. And here's Biffle reporting, but he doesn't admit that he was on the 6th floor that day. Can you imagine? Again, you think he'd be touting this all over the world and making a name for himself. And instead, they kept it very much to themselves, and I question why. The article on the 23rd was about the assassin crouching and taking deadly aim. And I want to read a portion after Biffle gets into great details about how 3 cartridges were found at the corner window, the cold drink bottle with the fried chicken and the Mannlicher found nearby. He quotes Truly, the superintendent. He cites Lumpkin, the deputy chief, who I think is one of the most important people to look at, using scores of firemen and policemen to search the building. All these details, only somebody in the scene would know. And then he cites an anonymous employee at the textbook film firm, who I think is in fact Truly, saying, I've never seen this quote anywhere else. I don't know if you're interested in this, but one of the fellows who works here is gone. I can't find him anywhere. He's 23, about 5'9", weighs about 150 pounds. I'd have to check the payroll section to be sure. I think he's been here a couple months. His name is Lee Oswald. That's the end of the article. And Biffle claims he was there for a long time and then left. And only after he left did he realize Lee Oswald was the same person that was the focus of his articles and interactions with Marguerite 4 years earlier. I find that frankly impossible to believe. Now, what I'd like to turn to is I want to call people's attention to people like Forrest Sorrells, who entered the building and said he came upon a Negro janitor who hadn't seen anybody leave through that door. Sorrells asked for the manager and was shown to Mr. Truly. Sorrells asked for a list be prepared of the names and addresses of all the employees of the book depository. He was looking for potential witnesses and had no basis for suspecting an employee. Well, most of us know the story of the roll call. I'm going to get there in a minute. The fellow who ran the story about the roll call was Pat Ganaway. He was in charge of the Special Services Bureau, which was basically the intelligence wing of the Dallas police. We had these Special Services Bureaus all over the country, often known as the Red Squads, especially in the 50s and 60s. And here's what Gaten Fonzie wrote about this back in 1971. A description of Oswald, for instance, went out over the police radio within 15 minutes after Kennedy was killed. Captain Ganaway, in charge of the police Special Service Bureau, later explained that Oswald's description was broadcast because he was missing from a roll call of the book depository employees. He was the only one who didn't show up and couldn't be accounted for. And Gaten points out, as most of us know, the facts are there was no roll call, that 48 of the 75 employees were outside when the president was shot, and most of them couldn't get back in. And that Ganaway's quote is picked up by the Dallas Morning News the next day. He was the only one who didn't show up and couldn't be accounted for. So again, 48 were outside at 12:30. 5 had not reported for work that day. Others left the building almost immediately upon hearing the shots. Many employees were not allowed back in and therefore were absent when the police search began. But Mr. Biffle, who had spent much of the afternoon in the building where he'd witnessed officers discovering the rifle, the shells and more, he claimed he saw 2 roll calls. He says at the second roll call, everyone was there but Oswald. He says at the second one, everyone was there. Oswald, of course, was already in custody by 2 o'clock. 73 FBI reports revealed that 41 were in custody or had left by 2:30. So this is utter nonsense, again, in Biffle's story from November 23rd, the day after. And Ganaway, in fact, with Revel, are party to the famous list of the names and addresses of the employees at the location, where the Harvey Lee Oswald name comes up first in line. And then there's all these check marks on that list pointing out who we haven't been able to, they hadn't been able to interview yet. So again, this whole roll call business is utter and complete nonsense. There's a second story that Kent Biffle tells, saying that the suspected killer was, here it is, defected to Russia in 59. And the last 2 paragraphs state that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, founded in New York in 1960 as a group dedicated to supporting the government policies of Castro, the group announced its formation in a full-page ad in the New York newspaper. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, run by Sauerwan, investigated the financing of the ad, found that the money came from the Cuban mission to the United Nations. Dozens of very deep pieces of information, pre-internet, that the local columnist has in his article, while neglecting to tell us he was on the scene that day. Biffle goes on by November 28th, not quite yet for that, by November 28th, to state in a really detailed article about Oswald and his acting alone supposedly that day, It's so well written that I think it was the model for what's known as Commission Document 1. What is Commission Document 1? It was created about 10 days later by the FBI as its report on the assassination, which of course they promptly leaked to the press, telling the whole backstory. And of course, there was no repercussions because the government uses leaks for its own work all the time. When other people do it, they get prosecuted and go to jail for years. And then Commission Document 1 became the profile for the Warren Report. So here's the article that became Commission Document 1, which in turn became the Warren Report 9, 10 months later. As many of us know, the FBI investigation was virtually what was rubber stamped by the Warren Commission. They relied on FBI agents and did very little research of their own. So the Kent Biffle story, I ask it this way. Was he witting or unwitting? Was he simply given all these leads and told to shut up and your career will be much better, and he was basically a cover-up participant? Or is it possible he was even part of the setup itself? More to discover. But Biffle has not gotten the focus he deserves. He is one of the many people, of a dozen or more, I'd say, that I would consider persons of interest in the assassination of the president. So that's the first half. That takes us from November 59 to November 63. Now I want to move to the next story, which is about a good guy here. Thayer Waldo, Dallas reporter. This is a story that's never been told properly. I think you're going to enjoy it and really be thinking harder after you hear it. Thayer Waldo wrote for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and he claimed to have been the last individual to shake hands with JFK in Love Field before his car drove off. And Mr. Waldo was reported in a police report I've got here as being at a Trade Mart waiting for the motorcade to arrive. Mr. Waldo accompanied the captain to the police car, and Mr. Waldo stated to me that he heard the first bulletin which came over the Dallas police radio, and it was, "Bulletin. The president's been shot. It is feared that others in his party have been wounded. The shots came from a triple overpass in front of the presidential automobile." And for those of you who love geography, that's also the same direction as the grassy knoll. The sixth floor of the book depository, on the other hand, is behind the automobile. If you look at the dispatch says just that. You see here Jesse Curry saying, "Go to the hospital, Parkland Hospital. Have them stand by. Get a man up on that top of that triple underpass and see what happened up there." Because you can see from up there. He's not necessarily saying that it happened at the triple underpass, but you can say up there, up that way. So he turned to the newspaper the next day, and unlike all the other stories, there's Mr. Waldo's article saying, "Security question remains puzzler." And this is the $64 question. And this is where the Secret Service should have been pilloried every day from then till now. Behind the tangled web of tragic circumstance surrounding the assassination, one unanswered question: how could it have been permitted to happen? No one else is asking that question. No one but Thayer Waldo. Now, Mr. Waldo had a very interesting background. His wife in the late 1930s was a woman named Grace Clements. She was not only ahead of what's known as the Surrealist Painters movement, she was an artist, but was also a member of the local Communist Party in the Oakland, California area. So he saw the communist movement, if you will, firsthand. And it's also kind of like Mr. Oswald, because Mr. Waldo had an interesting background. His father was the business manager at the Stars and Stripes. He was a captain of infantry during the World War I. And the Stars and Stripes, of course, is a daily newspaper of the U.S. Armed Forces. Waldo's father was a president and editor of McClure newspaper at Syndicate, a very big deal at the time. He was well connected, very tied to the military, and his son, Mr. Waldo, is not only very familiar with the military, he's also very familiar with the communists. Now, Thayer Waldo went to South America after World War II, and here's from the FBI reports. Thayer Waldo reported as stringer for Drew Pearson. Now, here in the States, I used to read Drew Pearson all the time when I was a very little kid. He was in the Washington Post analog, the Evening Star in D.C. It had the racier stories, more liberal type stories. Okay, now, in Uruguay in 1948, where Waldo is known for inaccurately reporting embassy events, he also allegedly friendly with a group of Spanish communists in Uruguay. Reports in Uruguay also disclosed that Waldo made derogatory remarks regarding U.S. policy in Latin America and expressed himself as sympathizer in Soviet politics. Then it goes on. Waldo also reportedly served as correspondent to Pearson in Ecuador in Colombia. After being invited to Ecuador by the president, Mr. Plaza, subject, took steps in 1950 to renounce U.S. citizenship, like Oswald. Sound familiar? And obtain Ecuadorian citizenship in order to advance official position with latter government. Later decided to retain U.S. citizenship, again, just like Oswald. In 53, was administrator of El Sol, leftist daily in Quito, that's Ecuador. Then he launched the Pacific Post newspaper later that year with a man named Francis Sutherland. That lasted for a small time. Only then the two men had a falling out. That feeling was aggravated when Sutherland charged that Waldo had raped his wife, which I don't believe, by the way. After the breaking of the partnership, Mrs. Sutherland is reported to have said that Waldo carried with him his CP Communist Party membership card and that he had tried to convert her to communism. And I don't quite believe all that either. Among other reasons, nobody had a Communist Party membership card in the States after the late 1940s, except apparently Mr. Waldo and then again Mr. Oswald when he showed up to Sylvia Duran at Mexico City. So, questionable. So much of this, I think that Waldo, and maybe working with Mr. and Mrs. Sutherland himself to build this story, and I think all this deserves a lot more investigation to find out why he's being painted with this broad brush. Now, again, we have all this business about Waldo being deported in Ecuador by the new president, and in June 53. So first he's invited, then he's kicked out, then he's deported. We're going to see more deportations for Mr. Waldo. January 60, Havana station reported Waldo as American newsman from Mexico City in Havana, who might be offered editorship of the English language Times in Havana. So now, late January 1960, the Mexico station reported subject discussed 6-week tour of Cuba with embassy officials. And then the file showed he resided in Mexico City for 2 years prior to late 60. And now what's up here is another story. This is FBI or CIA reporting that 1960, Waldo is identified as an overt contact of the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, the same outfit that had a lot of paper and tracked Oswald all the way to Dallas, 63. And he was living in New York City with the BCIU, First Avenue, New York City. The BCIU has lots of guests, like George Allen, the ambassador, like the director of the USIA, U.S. Information Agency, intelligence oriented, and the executive editor of the Washington Post. So, what's the BCIU? It's the Business Council of the International Americas. And Mr. Waldo is their media consultant. He's tape recording dozens of interviews with dozens of individuals for Spanish language radio programs where the council will broadcast from medium wave outlets in that area. And the English version is going to be used by the Voice of America. So again, I think you can tell that like Mr. Oswald, Mr. Waldo is somehow working both sides of the street. Now, here's the San Francisco Chronicle article where I live saying this reporter, this is Waldo reporting to himself about himself, spent the first half of 1960 in Cuba. At that time, with the U.S. Embassy still in operation and fully staffed. 8 of its personnel were CIA, 3 worked for the FBI, and each of the armed services had 1 to 5 operatives assigned to intelligence work. No special effort was required to learn these facts to identify the individuals so engaged. Within 30 days of their arrival in Havana, their names and agency affiliations were made known to me without solicitation by other correspondents or embassy employees. The latter included 1 CIA man who volunteered the identities of all 3 persons accredited to the FBI, and a Cuban receptionist, outspokenly pro-Castro. Was this Ms. June Cobb? I ask, who ticked off the names of 6 CIA agents with entire accuracy, a later check confirmed. In addition to embassy staffers, the CIA had a number of operatives. Thank you. So when we broke off, my focus was the fact that he'd basically given away the company store with all this information here. And this is highly treacherous material that's not supposed to be out there. This is really, really bizarre for Waldo to be putting this in the newspaper. If he's putting this in the paper, he's doing it on purpose at the direction of people in intelligence. Otherwise, he literally wouldn't be doing it. So now, from July 63 to October 64, Waldo is serving as the feature editor of the Star Telegram in Fort Worth. And I think it's also worth mentioning that in 56, while he was working for the El Paso Herald-Post in El Paso, he became acquainted with John Sutton, then a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, Fort Bliss, assigned to special communications work. He didn't see Sutton again until, having spent about 1.5 years in the Dominican Republic working with the BCIU, Waldo accepted the job of feature editor for the Star Telegram. This is about middle of 63. So he's got this working relationship with Sutton, which is going to come up soon. Now, Waldo, who not only does he shake hands with JFK and claims to be the last guy to do that, but he went directly from the Trade Mart to the police headquarters, afternoon of the 22nd. He says, when I got to Dallas, I was the first reporter in any medium, as far as I know. Certainly there's no other evidence to reach the 3rd floor of headquarters. No one tried to stop me or ask me for ID at that time. So he's had quite a day already. And then over the next couple days, his big contact becomes George Butler, who is a lieutenant, as he describes it, in the Dallas Homicide Division. On the day that Oswald is shot, 2 days later on the 24th, Waldo said he and the other reporters entered the ramp where a uniformed officer checked their credentials. He said Butler was an extremely nervous man, so nervous that when I was standing and asking him a question after I had entered the ramp and gotten down to the basement area, just moments before Oswald was brought down, he was standing profile to me. And I noticed his lips trembling as he listened and waited for my answer. Waldo said when the Dallas detectives escorted Oswald out of the hallway and onto the ramp, they had to walk within a few feet of the rear end of the parked police car where Waldo was standing with the ABC man. And then the ABC man pushed the microphone out in front of Oswald's face and said, "Do you have anything to say?" And a man with a hat made one long lunging step from Waldo's right to the front of Oswald, shoved out his hand, and shot Oswald. So Butler, in my mind, is one of the key suspects of this entire plot involving JFK, Oswald, Tippit, you name it. About a week after the assassination, this fellow John Sutton, we talked about a minute ago from the Army, asked Waldo if they could meet at the Dallas Press Club. Sutton told him that he had an informant that had seen Ruby and Tippit and Bernard Weissman of, the right-wing group's fame that got the JFK photo in the newspaper, together at the Carousel Club. He was reluctant to come forward because he had an affair with a stripper at the club and he was afraid he'd lose his work if it got out. Do you remember the story? This story was not the same one, by the way, as the Jarnigan story. That was another story. That's the Ruby Tippit with a different person there story. And he was reluctant to come forward because of the business with the stripper. And now, as I was mentioning earlier about CD1, the Commission Document 1, where that report said Oswald, a loner all life, acted by himself. So it got leaked to the press. And the question got out pretty quickly. Why was the FBI probe leaked to the press? Very, very good question. People were asking at this time, the FBI. Look, meanwhile, Sutton and Waldo got together, and Sutton introduced him to this informant. And who's the informant? He tells him his informant is Phil Burns, 5'8", white male, late 30s, 145 pounds, chestnut hair, glasses, employed by advertising agency on account of one of Sutton's sponsors. Well, Sutton told Waldo a little bit later he'd called the advertising agency and learned Phil Burns' actual name, Paul Bridwell. Burns said Ruby introduced him to Tippit and Wiseman, shook hands. Burns walked away, heard nothing. What's my opinion on all this? I think it was all made up by Sutton or somebody else. I don't think Waldo made it up. But I'll tell you this much. I think the whole story about Ruby introducing him to Tippit and Wiseman was made up by Burns. It was to get Waldo engaged in red herring type stories. I think the original story, by the way, I think somebody, the Jernigan, the attorney, did see Ruby and Tippit and Oswald together. But the Oswald character was actually Curtis Crayford, the gopher for Ruby, who looked very much like Oswald and who beat it out of Dallas the day after the assassination. And a lot of people think that Ruby and Crayford actually killed Tippit. That's yet another story. So, Waldo said he was too scared to publish the story and other information he had about the assassination. Lane introduced Waldo to Dorothy Kilgallen. Her article on the Tippit, Ruby, and Wiseman meeting appeared on the front page of the Journal American. And again, I think this was planted to confuse everybody with the Tippit, Ruby, and Oswald meeting that Jernigan reported. So this is about 2 weeks after the assassination, that story. Now, around this time, Marguerite Oswald's in the paper, and she's saying, I know my son, and she thinks, as we know, her son's an agent for American intelligence. So this whole article on December 8th just attacks Marguerite Oswald up and down the street. The Journal American picks it up from the AP. And the Journal American, I lost my clip here, but I'll just leave it alone. What I'm trying to point out is there was a little stamp that Hoover had. We might see it later. The stamp has the Washington Post and the Washington papers on it. Then it's got the New York papers like the Times and the Journal American, both right and left. Then you got the communist press, the Worker, the New Leader, all that. So you've got the capitalist press, the popular press, and the communist press. These are the 12 papers he thought were most important, Mr. Hoover did. These papers were the most important on the JFK case. It shows you what his agenda is. So now, meanwhile, this is what I wanted to get to. This is more nonsense getting into the press courtesy of Lonnie Hudkins. Hudkins advises on December 17th. He's just returned from a weekend in Dallas, where he's talked to Alan Sweat from the Chief Criminal Division at the Sheriff's Office. It's his opinion Oswald's being paid $200 by the FBI as an informant, and that his alleged number is S-172. Now, this is the kind of informant that Jim Hosty had all the time. They got paid $200. Here's another story from Hoover to Rankin over at the Warren Commission. Now, who's spreading this story? Joe Goulden, who's writing for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he tells a story about S-179. Goulden, by the way, is a guy who, to this day, is still alive, I believe, and has handled the documents of the estate of David Atlee Phillips for many years. Goulden is not the guy I consider a truth teller. The other people who work with Hudkins are Bill Alexander, the DA who ran around with a gun at all three sites that November 22nd, and Hugh Ainsworth, the notorious journalist who made up all kinds of stories and who stole Oswald's diary and from the DA and gave it to the press and made a lot of money. And that comes from Hoover himself. So Alexander and Ainsworth and Hudkins claimed in Esquire magazine they made all this up to prove their phones were being tapped by the FBI. I don't believe these gentlemen for a single moment about anything for a variety of reasons, most of which I think you already know. Now, here's the National Guardian, the left-wing paper in the United States at the time, Progressive News Weekly. Their headline is, "A grave doubt plagues the United States, and is Oswald innocent? A lawyer's brief." And now they run Mark Lane's brief attacking the evidence, where some of this evidence, like the story about Ruby and Oswald and Wiseman, gets squirreled right inside Mark Lane's stuff, which I actually wound up hurting Mark Lane's credibility. He's got a lot of good stuff. And the bad stuff, I think, is this kind of nonsense that got squirreled into the evidence by people like Ainsworth. Now, shortly afterwards, Rankin writes Marguerite a letter saying, "Thank you for sending me a telegram saying you want your attorney to have the right to cross-examine witnesses." And because Mark Lane and Marguerite are working together saying, we want to have the right to cross-examine these witnesses. Now, here's probably the most important thing I can share with you all today. This is one of the great, great events at DPUK. It comes right from Marguerite's testimony of the Warren Commission. She's going to fly out in early February of '64 to testify, both her and Marina. So she tells Mark Lane, "I'm not going in the car with Mr. Mike Howard. He's a Secret Service guy who had Jackie and Jack and escorted them to their rooms in Fort Worth the night of the 21st. He, in fact, was local talent from Denton, Texas, about an hour north of Dallas. And there was another Howard who came forward that day. That's Pat, Mike's brother. And so, sir, that day I was going to leave for Washington. I said, Mr. Lane, I'm scared to death. He says, don't worry, I will call Mr. Walden. And Mr. Walden is actually Mr. Waldo, who was the Star Telegram reporter, and ask him to accompany you. And Mark Lane called Mr. Waldo of the Star Telegram, asked him to accompany me, and Mr. Walden did accompany me with these two Secret Service men to the airport. And when Mr. Walden entered my home, I said, I'm so glad you were here because I didn't want to go with this agent by myself. And I've got a photo here, courtesy of none other than Dale Myers, our favorite reporter on the Tippit killing, not. Here, Myers superimposes Waldo's picture with the headline on the Star Telegram. Witness to assassination waits to name Oswald. Negro to give details. Who was that witness? Who was the Negro? Well, here's Mark Lane quoting from what Mike Howard said to him after he dropped off Marguerite. Wait until that old black boy gets up in front of the Warren Commission and tells his story. That will settle everything. Yes, sir. He was right there on the same floor looking out that next window. And after that first shot, he looked and saw Oswald, and then he ran. I saw him at the Dallas police station. He was still the scaredest cat N I ever saw him. I never saw him tell the officer, man, you don't know how fast and fast is because you didn't see me run that day. He said he ran and hid behind the boxes because he was afraid that Oswald would shoot him. Mike Howard then explained that the Negro witness had been arrested in the past by the Special Services Office of the Dallas Police for gambling. Again, that's Pat Ganaway. And his predecessor was Lumpkin, who ran the search. The Lumpkin-Ganaway connection is important because these guys were also Army intelligence reserves. And in fact, they say, just 50 of the cops in the force or more had that cross designation. And since he was familiar with that branch of the Dallas Police, he immediately gave himself up to that branch. Mr. Howard said he had visited the Negro witness while he was in the custody of the Special Services in the Dallas jail. This is all nonsense to try to hide this man from public scrutiny. Mike Howard tells this story, and then the way Mike tells it is that Well, when that old black boy gets up for the Warren Commission and tells what he knows, that will stop them all talking. And this is, again, this is all Howard pitching this to Thayer Waldo. Pat, Mike Howard's brother, turned around half in his seat and gave me an elaborate wink with raised eyebrows as if to say, so here's what I was telling you about. And then Mike goes on with his story and says that the way he heard it from this Negro person is that he looked and saw Oswald kneeling at the next window with a rifle aimed into the street. And I'll give you the heads up. All this goes into the front page of the Fort Worth paper, this business about an eyewitness seeing Oswald kill JFK. And so that's what happened. Mr. Howard said he visited the Negro witness while he's in custody of the Special Services and in the Dallas jail. And then Thayer Waldo ran that article the next day. And it's just unbelievable the way he told this story. And it's like, you saw that column. It's a 6-column piece. That's the story. And you can imagine the headlines that it got. And then after all this got told, Thayer Waldo states that after the story was originally written, the source called him on the telephone. And the only change to the story was that the witness was not on the 6th floor, but on the 5th floor. So he got the headlines. Now it's been broadcast to the world that there's an eyewitness to Oswald shooting JFK, and then it's reneged a day later. So, quite unbelievable. And now, Jack Revel at the Special Services Bureau says he didn't know of any witness held in protective custody by any agency. And he says, in his opinion, with that story, the witness referred to may possibly be Charles Douglas Givens. And Mr. Givens was originally the alibi witness for our hero. He was on the 6th floor during the morning filling orders with Lee Oswald. Lee was standing by the elevator in the building at 11:30 when Givens went to the 1st floor. When he started down the elevator, Lee yelled at him to close the gates in the elevator so Lee could have the elevator return to the 6th floor. On the morning of the 22nd, Givens saw Lee reading the newspaper in the domino room where the employees eat lunch about 11:50 a.m. So here we are at 11:50 a.m. Givens sees Lee eating lunch, reading the paper. Good alibi witness. Now, Givens is only one of 4 witnesses who say they saw Oswald on the 1st floor. Bill Shelley said, I remember seeing him down there when I came down to eat lunch at 10 to 12, as did the building's janitor, Eddie Piper, said he saw Oswald at 12 o'clock. Carolyn Arnold saw him at about 12:20. So here we are. And then the cover story in Life magazine, within days of Howard talking to Waldo, Pat Spear says, take a look at this, will you? A few minutes after noon, as the president was pulling away from the airport in the limo, an employee at the school book depository, Charles Givens, saw Oswald on the 6th floor and said, let's go down and watch the president go by. Not now, Oswald said, just send the elevator back up. Now, that's pretty, so what that means is instead of seeing Oswald in the lunchroom at 11:50, they're saying, oh, right after noon time, Mr. Givens saw Oswald up on the 6th floor and staying on the 6th floor. That's pretty serious. So, hence, Givens gave 2 accounts of Oswald's whereabouts. One in November that tended to corroborate his alibi, and another in April that tended to incriminate him. Yet his statement in November contained no mention of Oswald on the 6th floor, while the statement in April contains a denial that he had seen Oswald elsewhere. Now, let me offer you this. Waldo gave a deposition to the Warren Commission attorney, Leon Hubert, and the way he told the story was, he said, I got 26 minutes to hear your story, Mr. Waldo, before I catch on a plane. And please confine yourself exclusively to the events of November 24th. 1963. Okay. And so, as damning as this was about George Butler, you don't hear anything else about George Butler anywhere. And Waldo's statements about all these other events, which were incredibly important, were not allowed to be part of the testimony. Now, what did Waldo do? He offered a Warren Commissioner interview person, Mr. Hubert, a manuscript he wrote with reporter Ed Johnson called The Dallas Murders. He offered it to him on the record. Hubert didn't want it. So who did he work with instead? Again, Dorothy Kilgallen. And the story wasn't really published until September 3rd, 1964. And who else was he working with? Jim Cody, who was found murdered on September 21st, 64. And Bill Hunter and Ed Johnson. Cody was the one focused hardest on the book publicly. Waldo did not want to be publicly associated. He was scared for his life, scared for his family. And you can imagine after what he'd done with what he'd seen with Mike Howard and company. Cody's, and by the way, I should add that Mark Lane blew the whistle on the whole story about Mike Howard in May. And we saw the interviews, and the interviews, these guys deny everything. But the fact of the matter is that there is no way that the Howards could even keep their story straight. Mike Howard said they had no idea that Waldo was a reporter, and his brother said, oh yeah, we knew he was a reporter the whole time. This is all in writing. Nobody got in trouble, of course. And nobody got in trouble for the death of Jim Cody either. We're going to talk about that to wrap up here. Cody was killed supposedly with a karate chop on the late in September 64, days after Kilgallen's heart. Kilgallen died the next year, to make it clear, at 65. But after Cody's death, he was falsely accused of being gay to try to besmirch his reputation in Dallas at that time, in that backward era. Bill Hunter, who had been assisting with the book, had been killed 5 months after that. And says earlier, I can't remember whether it's 64 or 65 for the Hunter death. I thought it was 65. So the Long Beach officer says initially to the investigators that he dropped his revolver. And then he said he was playing quick draw with his partner when the gun went off. Within a week, a 22-year-old ex-con from Alabama named Larry Earl Reno was picked up selling Cody's personal effects and held on suspicion of murder. Cody's notes on the book were never found. When the Reno case came before the grand jury, Henry Wade, as we all know, the DA, secretly instructed the jurors not to indict, an extraordinary move for a chief prosecuting officer with as strong a case as he had. The grand jury went along with Wade, much like the Michael Brown case many years ago in St. Louis during the Black Lives Matter uprising in 2014. And in fact, that's the way it works in the United States. The grand jury, will indict a ham sandwich for a DA. But if the DA puts on a case and then says at the end with a nod and a wink, don't indict, they'll go along with that too, especially in sensitive cases involving police matters. And so here is the business about Dorothy column. It finally ran in October 4th, 1964. And she says, at any rate, the whole thing smells a bit fishy. It's a mite too simple that a chap kills the president of the United States, escapes from that bother, kills a policeman, eventually is apprehended in a movie theater under circumstances that defy every law of police procedure. and subsequently is murdered under extraordinary circumstances. And so, as a result of this terrible drama with the article that blew up in his face in May of '64, Waldo is asked to depart from his paper. He departs in 1967 from Mexico. And Bill Turner was quoted as saying that Waldo said, "I had to resign because of pressures applied by university officials, uh, uh, and the pressure was applied by powerful American business interests following his talk at the Foreign Correspondents Club, where he debunked the attack on the Garrison case." And Waldo went on vacation to Los Angeles. In July, he wired his resignation and then followed up with a letter to the head of the university. So basically, Waldo had to leave Texas, and now he's had to leave Mexico. So he wound up writing for a little paper in Illinois called the Alton Evening Telegraph, a real step down. From then on, Waldo had a pretty rough life. He wound up living in Mexico in the '80s. I found a good article about him reuniting with the child he gave up for adoption 2 years before he died. He died in 1989 under mysterious circumstances in the embassy in Mexico City. And so the question has to be asked, was he one of ours or one of theirs? And by ours, I mean the research community as opposed to theirs, the people who were involved in the cover-up of the assassination, if not worse. So I'm going to stop the share here and say, can you still see me?
Yep, we can still see you, Bill.
Okay. I just wanted, I got a final anecdote. Remember the Bridwell story that Waldo found out about from John Sutton, the guy who gave him all this crazy dope about Oswald and Tippit and you name it. The guy who gave the Bridwell story, wound up with the Bridwell story, was Larry Schiller himself. If you guys remember Larry Schiller, Larry wrote all those books attacking the critics as scavengers, and then Norman Mailer's Oswald's Tale. And he was forced to do it because of economic problems. As I understand it, he was deep in trouble with alimony from all those wives, and he had to curry favor. And so he wrote Oswald's Tales and all those other books. I love Norman Mailer. I'm not a fan of Larry Schiller for obvious reasons. And Larry worked with the FBI trying to find this guy Bridwell after Larry got the tip from Waldo, who had no idea that Schiller was a bad actor. He hadn't written these bad books yet. Schiller actually respected Waldo. And Schiller decided that he thought Sutton was on the level and Waldo was on the level. And but he couldn't find him. He just couldn't find him. But I think I found him. The Bridwell I found had Texas connections, Texas lineage, had spent time in Texas, left the service in '63, and probably found himself at that advertising agency in Dallas. It was part of his make. And Bridwell was at Guadalcanal, and he was there in Saipan. And he was years later the commanding officer that had the duty of protecting the CIA headquarters out there in Saipan. And so when they were out there looking for, if you can believe it, Amelia Earhart, he gave some good leads, and at the same time, he made the Amelia Earhart people job very difficult. He was a security-oriented guy. I don't think Bridwell was involved in killing JFK. I don't think he was even wittingly involved in the cover. I think he might have been unwitting. His job was security. It was his job to make sure people were not able to get to the far side of the island where the CIA facility was. And they didn't want us to get to the far side of the island either. He did give our local reporters a couple helpful leads on the Earhart story. I don't think they were phonies. So I think it was wheels within wheels. You got to dope out who's a truth teller and who's spreading red herrings and who is worse than that. I think Waldo was one of ours. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So can I open to the floor? Any questions, guys? No? Do you have a question from Joe Bax? can you make the PowerPoint presentation available to us, or is it proprietary?
No, no, no. I'm circulating it, so you
Okay.
guys are welcome to it.
Yeah. So if you would, Joe's just commended you. If you could send that to me.
Oh, you've already got it. I sent it an hour ago.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. Great.
shortly before I began.
Okay. Well, I'll pass that on to Joe and anybody else that might want that. Oh, there's a question from the floor. Paul Blow has got a question.
Hey Bill, how are you?
Good, Paul.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you see Biffle, right? Is how is it spelled? Biffle?
Yeah, it's kind of like baffle with an I.
You see him sort of as the equivalent of Hal Hendricks?
He was a color guy. He, was in my part of the world, he would be like Herb Caen, in New York, like Walter Winchell. I'm sure that all you UK folks have gossip columnists. He was a little bit more than a gossip columnist. He would always tell stories about Texans, local color kind of stuff. And so he was from that school. And he wasn't above being an informant for the FBI, which I don't think a journalist should do.
Mm.
It's one thing for journalists to pass along, bits of information. It's another thing to be listed as an informant in a FBI report. So he's an interesting character. I've been studying him for years, and I'm not done yet. And I invite anybody else to pile on.
It's interesting what you're saying about Alia and Biffle getting into the TSBD, but Ainsworth, of course, didn't get in. How do you reconcile that?
Which fellow, Neil, didn't get in?
Hugh Ainsworth didn't get in, and yet
Did he try?
he certainly did try. So that's
So,
odd.
does he have a witness saying that he tried?
Uh, well, I mean, he's just come. I mean, he's at every single scene, isn't he? I mean,
He sure is.
he's at the furniture store search. He's at the Texas Theater. He's at Dealey Plaza.
Oh,
He's at 10th and Patton.
That's right.
You
He's
know,
everywhere.
so I thought, if he's that rogue, he might have got into the TSBD, but he didn't.
Well, Robert
According to his
McNeil got
book.
into the first floor of the TSBD, and so did Pierce Allman, who were
Yeah.
both, one local and one national reporter. At the time, they could get to the first floor and no higher.
Right.
And it was a very conscious decision to let those two gentlemen in and nobody else in. They were visible, they were filming, they were reporting. The Secret Service guy apparently told Allier, that's close enough. They were controlled. And the question is, who was the puppet master, and were they truly puppets? Really important questions that haven't been asked. And this is where I'm really trying to go as deep as I can.
It's interesting that Powell got in, didn't he? The O&I guy.
Well, yeah, well,
He got in and he couldn't get out, apparently.
he was an army guy and he couldn't get
Yeah,
out.
army.
He was trapped in there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, we've come to the end of a very long day, Bill.
No, you guys have done your duty, and
We are
I'm glad
flagging.
I didn't go overtime
Yeah.
too badly.
I think the bar beckons actually. Okay, and before you go, I just want to shout out to Nancy, one of your fellow Californian-based researchers, Nancy Wyford. I'm sure you know of her. She's been with us since 1 o'clock in the morning your time. So, Nancy, I don't know how you've managed to hang on in there for so long. But tomorrow it's a better day for you because you're presenting to us at 6:20 in the morning, so you can get a bit more sleep, Nancy. Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, Bill, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great time for the rest of the conference.
I hope to see you in Dallas at some point in the future, of course.
Of course.
Okay, take care, Bill. Bye.
Carry on. All right. Thanks.